Tashidile. We are here at the Tibetan Reception Center, where the Tibet Policy Institute of the Central Tibetan Administration is hosting their 7th Young Indian Scholars Conference on Tibetan Studies. For this episode of In Conversation with Tibet TV, we have Professor Shrikanth Kondapalli, who is one of the keynote speakers at the conference. Amongst many other titles and achievements that Professor owns, he is also a writer, an expert, and a professor on Chinese studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Thank you, Ashida.
So in one of your recent interviews with ANI, you've laid out reasons why India should not trust China in many aspects, be it the border standoff or the cyber attacks that India has been having that traces all the way back to China, and now with the Medok hydroelectric power project. So in all of these conflicts, where do you think Tibet stands for India? And also, do you see Tibet resurfacing as a leverage point for India?
I don't think this is a leverage that India is looking at. There are debates in India for the past 7 decades on what should be done with the Tibet policy. There were 2 views. One is engagement policy, that is the Nehruvian policy, where by Panchsheel principles in 1954. A second thought is Sardar Patel, who was the Deputy Prime Minister of India at that time. He wrote a letter to Nehru suggesting that if the Chinese occupy Tibet, then it will be problematic for Indian security as well. So these 2 streams of thought bifurcated, but they also converged many times. And Sardar Patel's comments came to light after the 1962 border clashes. And we had a freeze in bilateral relations till about 1980s. 76 was the diplomatic resumption between India and China, and then later the 1988 Rajiv Gandhi's visit to China. We never had a border with China before. Now that China had occupied Tibet in 1950 and the 17-point agreement, the Chinese came onto the borders of India. So that became a big national security issue for India. So there was the engagement policy, and that was conditioned by the Chinese occupation of Tibet in 1951. But there is also the view that India should preserve the Tibetan identity for as long as they live in India. And this policy is an afterthought, and that is also because His Holiness the Dalai Lama came to India in 1959. So there is different views at different times in Indian foreign policy, but never as a leverage. India, in its national interests, it never considered Tibet as part of China historically. There is no Indian document which says that Tibet is a historical part of China. Number 2, India never in its official statements mentioned about Tibet as an inalienable portion of China. Many countries across the world say Tibet is an inalienable portion of China, but India never said this.
Right. So, Professor, you've briefly touched on India's foreign policies, and that includes Tibet, right? So, for the last 6 decades and more, India's shift in many of its foreign policies. However, it seems that India's policy on Tibet has remained pretty much similar throughout. Can you throw some light on the historical perspective of India's One China policy and how that impacts both India and Tibet? Do you think India should reconsider or rethink that policy?
One China policy is not about Tibet. One China policy is about Taiwan. So the current view that One China policy should include Tibet, it is not part of the Indian foreign policy. In December 1950, there was a talk between Indian officials and Chinese officials on the diplomatic recognition. So the talks continued for 3 months till April 1950. From 1949 December to April 1950, Indian Foreign Service and the Chinese Foreign Ministry officials, they discussed this issue on Taiwan, not on Tibet. So they came out with the One China principle, and they call this as India model. And in this model, they recognize Taiwan as an inalienable portion of China. So we get confused with the One China policy inclusive of Tibet. But when India and China discussed, it was related to Taiwan, not about Tibet. In 1954, of course, the Nehru administration recognized Tibet as part of China. But that's not part of the One China policy. It's part of the Panchsheel principles, 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. And of course, it was very oblique, not very direct way of recognition. It says so and so area and in Tibet and so area in India will have trade and other interactions. So it was not a straightaway point that Tibet is part of China. Not a very explicit. It's implicit in 54 agreement. So, and that is because of the balance of power between India and China.
On paper, it refers to Taiwan. The One China policy means there's only one government, right, under Chinese rule, Chinese regime. Then if India continues to agree on the One China policy, don't you think it's in no time Tibet will be ultimately included in that list with Taiwan?
No. Dai Pinko, the state counselor is higher than foreign minister in China. In 2006, discussing with the Americans in the strategic and economic dialogue that they have, he mentioned what are China's core interests. And he mentioned about the ideological independence of the Communist Party. He mentioned about territorial integrity and sovereignty. In that, he mentioned Tibet, Taiwan, and later in 2009, he mentioned South China Sea. So when China says One China, they include all this. But when India mentions about One China policy, it is about Taiwan. And even on Taiwan, even on One China policy, since 2010, no Indian document mentions about One China policy. Of course, it doesn't mean India has rejected the One China policy, but it is silent on One China policy. Former Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj, she told her Chinese counterpart that China should recognize One India policy in order for India to reiterate One China policy.
Right. So, Professor, talking about China's expansionist policy, tell us about the implications of the ongoing China border settlement initiatives or projects. How does these so-called rural revitalization initiatives affect Tibet's bordering neighboring countries, not just India?
Yes, the somewhere 4 or 5 years ago, they passed the land border law. General Chao Tsung-chi, who was a Western Theater Command Chengdu military leader, he is now part of the National People's Congress Foreign Affairs Committee, and he passed the land border law. And in this, they want to preserve the sovereignty of China with a lot of build up. So the land border law suggests to construction of Shaokang villages, well-off society villages. So they have since 2017 constructed about 628 of these. But most important is 200 of these villages out of 628 were on the road from Lhasa to Kalimpong when His Holiness the Dalai Lama had a flight in 1959. So the most important of these well-off societies is that line where they want to control, and this is the preparation for the 15th Dalai Lama succession issue. But it also has the border related problems with countries like Bhutan, Nepal, India, Pakistan. In India, China border areas, the line of actual control. One of the first well-off society was created in Lungchu. Lungchu was captured by China in 1962, and they now have a well-off society village in Lungchu. It's part of the McMahon line, yet they have constructed the well-off society. From an Indian point of view, also is important is the Chinese plan to construct well-off society villages in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir regions. So that is again a national security issue that India is concerned with. With the demographic changes, they are inviting a lot of Han Chinese into Tibet, the Hanization process. Now these Han Chinese men sleep with Tibetan women in the villages, in the areas when they come as migrant laborers. And the offspring born to both of these Han and Tibet ethnic minorities, they then claim these lands, including these well-off society village lands. So this creates a new fact on the ground, and China wants that kind of a situation so that in future they can claim all these areas as theirs. So this is a new situation that has emerged with the well-off society villages constructed. The second, as I mentioned before, they are constructing these also for the 15th Dalai Lama succession issue. Third, they constructed these also for example, some of these houses also are accommodating ex-servicemen from the army, from the intelligence, from other who have retired, and they're all now being invited to these villages to stay there.
Right. So, Professor, you've long studied China and its political ecosystem entirely. So, in the last few decades, what are some internal changes and challenges that you've observed within their system? And then also, how do you see that affecting Tibet and India and its relation?
One of the major domestic events in China is the churning out process. Middle class has emerged in China. It's now 4 to 500 million out of 1.4 billion. Middle class generally has, they demand a lot of freedoms for themselves, property rights, religious rights, and so on. But they also sometimes become very authoritarian. So one of the effects of middle class is nationalism, and increase in nationalism creates a lot of problem for the minorities. So the subnationalisms, Tibetan subnationalism emerging within Tibet, or Uyghur nationalism, Mongolian nationalism. So this is one factor that is important to understand. And for example, today the Chinese are redefining national ethnic minorities, nationalities as they call. The Chinese definition of nationalities was dependent on Soviet leader Joseph Stalin's definition that an ethnic group is one which is living in an area for thousands of years or a historical period. They share the same language, culture, religion, identity. They belong to one area. So there are 55 of these small nationalities, meaning small in the sense of population. The Han ethnic minorities are about 92%, and the rest of 8% belong to all these ethnic minorities. They call nationalities. Today, the Chinese want to change this definition, Soviet definition, to now include the nationalist perspectives. So this is more long-term in nature and provides for Han Chinese intrusion into the ethnic minorities, especially in terms of assimilation. Assimilation would then mean there won't be any Tibetan identity in the future. So nationalism also affects this aspect. As you already know, there used to be about 7 to 8 million Tibetans before. Now it's 3 million in TAR and about 4 to 5 million in Qinghai and other areas which used to be part of traditional Tibet. So the Tibetan community has dwindled, and this is partly because of the assimilation policies. So this is one domestic consequence of the changes that are happening in China. A second domestic happening in China is capital flow. So you see in Tibet, the Quantum Development Bank, Shenzhen Development Bank, some Shanghai Construction Bank, or so there is capital that is coming from the more prosperous provinces in China into Tibet, but with the capital, it is also bringing in a lot of migrant laborers. In a study, it was found that a majority of the people who are going to Tibet are basically migrant laborers, Han migrant laborers, and they settle down in those areas for a very less period because of the oxygen issues. Nevertheless, they are now integrating into the Tibetan community by marrying into the Tibetan community. So this is a new phenomena that has happened, and that will also have demographic problems in Tibet. So capital flow, with that the migration flow. And also today, much of the wealth is for the Han Chinese, not for Tibetans. I mean, if you see the Potala Palace and the nearby, all these shops are taken over by the Han Chinese.
Also the fact that there are more Han Chinese in Tibet than Tibetan themselves, right?
That's right. So there is now estimated 4 million Han Chinese compared to less than 3 million Tibetans. So there is the demographic change that has happened. So this is another change that could be said to be. Third is, as a result of these banks going into and investing in Tibet, there is the infrastructure projects that have been built up. For example, there is the Qinghai to Lhasa, Gormukh to Lhasa, the railway line. There is the highway, Qinghai to Lhasa highway, Gormukh to Lhasa highway. There is an energy pipeline. They are now constructing Sichuan to Lhasa railway line, for which President Xi Jinping went to Ningxi prefecture to make an examination of what is happening. And Premier Li Qiang also went there to inspect some of these projects, including the dam construction or mineral exploitation. So these infrastructure projects are mainly meant for removing any isolation that Tibet may have had historically. We generally say roof of the world because it is hard to get into Tibet because of the high altitude, 4,500 meters above sea level on an average. Or generally, the Tibetan community has been aloof from the global communities. And so these infrastructure projects will remove that buffer, will remove that isolation, will remove the 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 specific way of life that Tibetans have been having for centuries, and it would physically integrate into China. So this is another change that has happened with capital, infrastructure, security, buffer zone concept, strategic depth. All of these have created this integration into China. Tourism, for example, 40 to 50 million tourists from China go to Tibet with these infrastructure projects and gradually taking over the occupations, employment opportunities, and others. So this is one consequence of the changes that have happened recently with modernization. So China is pumping in these capital, pumping in iron and steel, cement for infrastructure so that Tibet doesn't remain aloof, isolated from the Chinese communities. Another change is, I think, the issue of water, which is many North China regions are parched. They have no water. They are water stressed. So water is required, and the state has constructed a lot of dams or um, projects which is to divert the river. And three main projects have been initiated. The first two have already been constructed, diverted. So cumulatively, 30 billion cubic meters of water has been diverted from the south rivers into north. The other is the Great Bend project at Namcha Barua, Mutwo, and other places where they wish to do more diversion projects. So this is to be completed in 2050 with roughly 17 billion cubic meters of water to be transported to the north. So massive water because of the water stress in the rest of China. And this is another development that has happened in recent times. But I would rate the sinicization that President Xi announced on August 21st, 2020 as one of the major issues, because sinicization would mean everything then would be Hanized. Religion, culture, the colonial boarding schools, all the identity. One of the issues then would be whether Tibetans will retain their identity or not. So that is a big problem in the future.
So to add on the infrastructure development that China so-called claims to have in Tibet, so if we talk about the railway lines, it is not for economic prosperity for Tibetans, it is but only for all of the railway stops at the mining places in Tibet so that they could extract all of those mines and conveniently take it back to China. Tibet produces around, as you said, more than 130 mines, including gold and lithium, which is used for making phones, right? And then if we talk about the Han Chinese migration in Tibet, that is one of the sole reasons for what makes China easy for the language sinicization, the culture, the religion, ultimately eradicating Tibetans in Tibet, right? And then also with all these dams, China has so far built more than 400 dams, and now with the Medok hydroelectric project, it's even bigger than the Three Gorges dams, right? The project, they're, I think, investing more than 160 million US, 60 sorry 160 billion US dollars. So all of these only leads to prosperity of China and not of Tibet, ultimately having Tibetans having to bear the all of the consequences, right?
Yes, indeed. I think that is a measure for which the Tibetan community needs to discuss these issues extensively, come out with some consensus points on how these can be addressed. Most important, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, the glacier meltdown has created a lot of environmental havoc.
Mm.
So, in WikiLeaks, there was a mention about this, that the priority is to look at the environmental issues.
Right. So that leads to my final question. What are some policy recommendations which you offer to the Indian government and also to the Central Tibetan Administration?
One, the Indian government had taken on itself to preserve the Tibetan identity. So, schools, educational institutions, community build-up process, healthcare. There is a commitment from India on that since 1959. What we have seen in the Tibetan community is that many of them become highly talented. For example, we see that in the refugee camps, in the 10th class exams, the Tibetan students are coming at the India national level, number 2, number 3, sometimes number 1 in the 10th class results. This basically suggests that there is inherent talent, and India needs to further this by equipping them with IT and AI related aspects, because these are futuristic in nature. And from financial point of view as well, it is easier to earn money by these. And online, jobs can be done with hardly any pollution, with hardly any other problems. So I think that is in terms of the policy option. A policy I would suggest is to raise the level of interaction between Indian government officials and Dharamshala. We have a foreign affairs liaison office that needs to be strengthened in terms of the interactions. We have seen recently Prime Minister Modi tweeting on X about the birthday functions of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Also, several ministers attending the function, Mr. Kiran Rijiju and various others. So there is the interaction increasing, but this has to be institutionalized. It cannot be only on a birthday. It has to be made more robust, more institutionalized. India could share some of its resources with Tibet to institutionalize more of those. So that's a policy option, which is good for both because of the number of changes that are happening across the globe. I mean, we have seen the Trump tariffs, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, possible China-Taiwan invasion scenarios. So many things are happening, and hence there needs to be a close coordination between the Indian government and the Dharamshala establishment. So that is another policy option. Yeah, there are many like this.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your time and for your valuable insights on Tibet, China, and India policy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. And that is all for this episode of In Conversation with Tibet TV. I will see you in the next one.